on to a special edition of our Town Hall series. This time we're going to be featuring 4 of Blank Slate Media's columnists to discuss the issues of the day. We have a very distinguished and disparate group who should make for interesting conversation. This evening's discussion is sponsored by Northwell Health. We thank them for their support. And let me start by introducing our panel, beginning with Adam Haber. Adam is a former Roslyn School Board trustee. He's a former head of economic development for the town of Hempstead, and he's a principal of SKB Real Estate. Jerry Kremer is a 23-year veteran of the New York State Assembly, a Hofstra University trustee, and a Zucker Hofstra Medical School board member. With us as well is George Marlin, author and editor, and the former executive director of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. And Karen Rubin rounds out our group. She is the publisher of News and Photo Features, Travel Features Syndicate, and she is the former editor of the Great Neck News. So we're having a different format this time. Most of our town halls, or just about all the town halls, had a specific topic and theme. This, we're going to address the issues of the day. We have our 4 pundits from Blank Slate, and let me kick it off with a question. Liz Cheney lost her leadership position in the Republican Party after refusing to accept the big lie in the 2020 election that the election was stolen from President Trump. And Republican-controlled states around the country are also seeking to restrict voting. What, if anything, will that mean to Nassau County in the upcoming races for county executive and county controller? And Jerry, we'll let you kick it off in responding to that.
Well, I don't think the Trump playbook, is going to really apply very much to Nassau County. I've seen attempts on the part of the local people to nationalize certain races, and it just doesn't work out. There were candidates running for modest offices in Nassau and Suffolk County, and they were accusing them of being soft on MS-13 gangs. So the fact of the matter is that I don't think you can nationalize a county executive race. It's going to boil down to personalities and turnout. But surely the Liz Cheney and the Trump derangement syndrome or whatever else is going on nationally, I don't think it's going to impact Long Island.
Do you not see that though it is coming down to a local level in terms of at least the state legislatures, where in a number of cases there's efforts to change the voting laws that tend to restrict? Is that not something that filters down to the local politics?
I think most of the Republican politicians on Long Island, they really haven't adopted or put on the Trump cloak, if you will. We haven't heard that yet. It is conceivable that in Suffolk County, we might get a taste of that coming into November. But I think for now, all these things that are happening to suppress voters around the country, it hasn't reared its ugly head. And even though there's going to be redistricting impacting on Long Island, not only this year, but in the county legislature in the future, I don't see that same pattern developing here on Long Island. Why we're immune from it primarily is because of the fact that we have a certain number of competitive races. Many of the people who are running in lots of these races around the country, the redistricting has made them so safe, they can basically vote to repeal the Bill of Rights and get away with it.
I don't understand what you're really saying, because Blakeman, who is running for Nassau County executive, was Trump's man in the Nassau County Republican Party. And now you have Zeldin, who was the only congressman on Long Island to vote against the 1-6 Commission. He voted against the American Rescue Plan. He's now running for governor. And as for the redistricting that you mentioned, the fact is that the Republicans control the legislature, even though they don't have a majority of the vote in Nassau County. And I think it's to Laura Curran's credit that she's been able to lead so competently when you don't necessarily have a Republican-led legislature that would be supportive. The policy of Republicans today is to obstruct, not to go forward.
George, now let me ask you this, George, because this is kind of a time for conservatives, where there's been kind of there are conservatives who've moved over, there's a line now in the Republican Party, and some conservatives have crossed it. Liz Cheney has in Congress. You've had people like Bill Kristol and the folks in the Lincoln group. Are you still, which side are you on in terms of the politics of the Republican Party? Because there seems to be a division there.
First of all, for the record, let me make clear, I'm not a registered Republican. I'm a member of the New York State Conservative Party.
Okay.
I was on street corners in 1965 in Brooklyn when Bill Buckley ran for mayor of New York. I was 13 years old, handing out flyers for him. And I wrote the history of the New York State Conservative Party, a book called Fighting the Good Fight some years ago. So let me proceed from there. And don't get me wrong, some members of the Conservative Party, in my judgment, sold out over the years, particularly in Nassau County, and I've been very critical of them in your newspapers and Long Island Business News, et cetera. Having said that, I thought it was a mistake to dump Liz Cheney. I've met her a couple of times. I don't know her that well. She's a very articulate, bright person and supported Trump administration policies 93% of the time. However, she very wisely said, we got to get off the great lie nonsense, which I agree with. I don't know if anybody else knows Donald Trump here. I first met him in the 70s. I spent time with him. He was in my office several times when I was executive director of the Port Authority, and I was singularly unimpressed. I find him to be a narcissistic fool who, thinks he's the smartest man in the world. It's very sad. The personality and the way he runs his life. Having said that, I agree with Cheney. We've got to get off the great lie stuff and proceed accordingly because there will be great opportunities. Because, what we're going to see next year in particular is the primaries, both on the Democratic side and the Republican side. If Democratic progressives led by AOC win a number of primaries in these marginal seats, because many of these moderate Democrats are bowing out, and they pick up those nominations, those seats can become Republican seats. Similarly, if a couple of crazy people win Republican primaries, as we saw in Delaware a few years ago, and remember that witch who won the Republican primary running for the Senate seat there, the Republicans could also self-destruct in a sense. Having said all that, if we bring it all home, what's going to be important next year is the redistricting of the congressional seats and the legislative seats. And since Democrats control the whole ball of wax now, my guess is they will make sure what were Republican leading seats are obliterated. My assumption is they will take the first and second congressional districts, sort of split it in half to make sure Democrats win. And since we lose a seat, they could redo a couple of seats upstate around Syracuse. So my assumption is Republicans probably lose 4 seats in New York State next year. So redistricting matters on the state level and federal level, although I agree it's going to be tougher with the county legislature. However, Bruce Blakeman is probably one of the worst candidates I ever met in my life. And I tried to teach him about municipal finance when he ran for comptroller many years ago and realized I might as well talk to the wall. So he may have been the Trump tooting the horn, but as you recall, when he announced his candidacy for United States Senate, and Joe Mondella, who was then the county boss, was standing there, said, quote unquote, well, what do you think about Bruce Blakeman running? He said, well, he's good looking. So that's the best you could say about Bruce Blakeman, who is losing more races than Harold Stassen of yesteryear lost running for president a number of times. So I don't think Laura Curran's going to have a heavy lift here to be reelected because of the weakness of Bruce Blakeman. It shows how desperate they are. That's the best they could come up with.
he was the liaison for Trump, and we actually had him on before the election, and we had a panel discussing the upcoming election. And he had appeared to be, as a town councilman in Hempstead, to be moderate. He had been one of the people that actually was opposed the town supervisor at the time there. But when he came to our panel, he was a Trump liaison, and he went full Trump at our session. He was very aggressive in following the Trump line. What happens if he continues to do that, do you think?
I think he probably will self-destruct, but he will probably self-destruct for a host of reasons. Listen, when he ran for U.S. Senate in the Republican conservative primaries, came in the last. Okay. He lost his county legislative seat back in '99, I guess, after voting to increase taxes 19%, I think, at the time. He lost the controllers race. He got creamed. So again, this is not a guy who, and of course, he lost to Kathleen Rice as well. So this is not a guy who's a good candidate to start off with. Okay, he's another narcissist in politics. So he may walk away from Trump. He may not walk away from Trump. I don't think it matters. He's just a bad candidate.
Adam, do you have what's your feeling on you run for county executive?
I have. I just like to hear George Marlin speak. I could do it all night. Well, there's two parts to your question. First of all, was Liz Cheney affecting county races, and what's the feeling about Liz Cheney being forced to step down from the third position in the Republican Party? I mean, it's a bit frightening on the national level how there's deniers that the election was fair and that January 6th actually happened. It almost seems like a fascist throwback to the early 1930s about what went on in Europe, and it's scary. One of the things I find refreshing about George and other people who have actual stances and opinions is they believe in something. Is that they have values, they have principles. They don't have to agree with me, but I really respect that. And I think Liz Cheney, while I didn't support her politics, it wasn't a heavy lift to have those principles and considered courageous, but they punished her for it. And when you have a guy like Lee Zeldin who will do anything and everything to help the president and promote his agenda, it worries me. But on a national level, pushing that down to the county level, it has almost no, just like Jerry said, no effect at all on the county races. I mean, county races are about clean water, real estate taxes, potholes. It's a very local, parochial kind of mentality that's what people care about. What affects me that I could see and touch, not some esoteric thing happening in Wyoming or California. It's more of a local thing. But as far as the race with Laura Curran goes, I actually worked with Bruce Blakeman for 2 years. I made a point to meet with him very early on because my goal of taking the job of head of economic development, of which I donated my salary to charity, was to really see what I could do to help the community. That's why I ran for office. I want to see what I can get done. And I said point blank, there's so many good things we can do. The towns of Hempstead, the largest town in the country with almost 800,000 people, you could do an energy performance contract to upgrade facilities at no cost. We could put solar in the landfill. We could do DocuSign to make getting contracts done quicker, or rebuild the building department, get rid of the typewriters that are in the clerk's office. And he said, I'm not going to do any of that, point blank, when I first met him. And I said, why? He said, because Laura Gillen called me a liar and I'm not going to work with her. I said, but you have people's lives in your hands who you could affect in a positive way. You could take the credit, I don't care, but there's so much you can do with that costs the taxpayers no money. And he said, point blank, I don't care. So as county executive, he's not good looking anymore, George. He was maybe 20 years ago, as he was a good basketball player back in the late 80s, early 90s. But he's just somebody who decided to throw his hat in the ring, and stranger things have been known to happen. But I'd be very disappointed if he became our county executive, because I don't think he'll improve the lives of his constituents.
Let me just, before we move on to some state politics, there is the other thing, and this is of a piece, which was the opposition to the the January 6th commission, the 1/6 commission, although 35 Republicans did do it. But is there a concern? The attack on the Capitol was not the first attack on an election or on a government. Can you conceive of a time in Michigan they came with rifles, with long rifles to the Michigan courthouse, and people felt threatened there? Is there a concern that this threat that it can go to, if you go to state houses or even county courthouses, where people who are unhappy with the result decide to take matters into their own hands? Is that something that could happen in New York? Deep blue New York. Could that happen here?
My concern is who's going to run for public office if it's okay to intimidate the people the way they are. In Arizona, I think it was the public health official was told by the sheriff not to show up at a public meeting because they couldn't guarantee her safety. I mean, this is completely out of hand. I'd also like to throw in something before you move on from this topic. I have the feeling that Republicans don't really support Trump. They're using him as an excuse to advance these voter suppression policies all around the country and the big lie and so forth, and also to get his donors like Zeldin is probably trying to do. It's not that they're promoting Trump when in fact they should have used the opportunity of the impeachment to pull away and throw him out of the Republican Party, but they're not really interested in governing. They're interested in power.
Steve, last fall, there was a motorcade which originated in New York City and worked its way out to Montauk Point of Trump supporters. And I have to say this, and I've been around the political scene a long time, it probably was the scariest scene that I've ever encountered in my lifetime. But, to assume that these acolytes have gone away is just wrong. They're very much embedded. They're embedded in the Zeldin congressional district. And if there's changes in the dynamics of that district through redistricting to weaken, the strength of that core group, it could make that race highly competitive the next time around. But, it is conceivable that Bruce Blakeman in the campaign that he runs will use some of the national tactics just as a laboratory test to see what, sticks to the wall. So to assume that we're not going to get any taste of Trumpism in the November election would be naive.
Well, let me remind you, however, in terms of intimidation, conservatives have been intimidated across this country if they dare to go to a college campus to speak. And if we want to do an investigation, why don't we investigate some of the riots that have taken place in Seattle and Portland and Minnesota and even on the west side of Manhattan? Have you walked down 9th Avenue lately? Take a good look at it since the riots last summer. So in terms of intimidation, the right is guilty in some cases, and the left is certainly guilty as well. And Black Lives Matters haunts people and threatens people as well. And politicians, you look at some of the mayors out west, how they were intimidated. So you can't be St. Francis Assisi and Don Juan at one at the same time. We're both sides have crazies on each side. They're scary, they're dangerous. And all we have to look at is the riots of last summer to get some idea on the left how dangerous things could be.
Yeah, but I can't agree with George on that issue because the legislation that barely passed the House yesterday, and the Republicans, of course, want this commission expanded to look into those things, to compare what happened in these communities to what happened in January 6th. January 6th was an attempt to overthrow the government, okay?
Oh, that's, come on, a bunch of loony tunes.
Even Stevie Wonder can tell you that it was an insurrection.
Please.
So the answer is, George, you're entitled to your investigations of any kind you want, but let's not compare that to what happened on January 6th.
I compare it every day of the week because January 6th is a couple of Looney Tunes that the only person that was killed by a police officer. And so there has been a huge exaggeration in my mind, while the mainstream media has gone out of its way to ignore a lot of the damage that has been done in the riots in these cities. So if you want to investigate one, investigate them all.
let me add to that because I have a very strong opinion about it. The mainstream media is both CNN and Fox. I mean, there's not one or the other. You can't call one or the other the mainstream media. But what happened in January 6th was not just a couple people. It was thousands of. I mean, I've watched that thing ad nauseum from every angle. But in fairness to what George is saying, the far left in Portland, I have a supermarket chain I'm on the board of in Portland that was shut down night after night. And probably the most left-leaning person I've ever met in my life was verbally and emotionally attacked for weeks at a time, to the point where she literally had to close her stores down. The extremes on the Republican side around the election, my pillow guy, Matt Gaetz, the Looney Tunes, but on the left, while they might not have a champion of insanity, there are mobs doing equally as much damage of a different, maybe not to democracy, but to the safety and security of the average person. And the extremes on both sides. While I'm a diehard Democrat, I'm also a bit fiscally conservative. I consider myself a moderate liberal.
But you don't see a difference with the January 6th. They were looking for the vice president. They
were
hoped
looking to kill
him out for his
people,
own security.
But they were looking to kill people, absolutely. And look, it was horrific. I was nauseous. I thought it was one of the worst things that I've ever witnessed in my life, and I was in 9/11. But the left, and I had a firsthand view through my dealings, because I go to Portland quite often. They shut down around the federal building. They damaged property. It was a mob scene of a different ilk. While not dangerous to democracy and our Constitution, still dangerous just the same. And I don't think the extreme should be tolerated. I think, is one worse? Yeah, I'll have to say I thought what happened for the country on January 6th was worse, but there's no like, oh, we're fine and the left is perfect. No, there's problems on both sides. And I think if we came more to the middle, and we don't have to agree.
You don't have a president advocating for Black Lives Matter to destroy property. You have the Democrats saying, don't destroy property. Peaceful protest, 99% of the Black Lives Matter protests, which brought millions of people, a cross-section of people, 99% were peaceful and respectful. And there was 1% of people who are agitators.
1% of 100 million is a million people. Right. And
I mean, 1%, or whatever percent.
But regardless,
good point, Adam. Good point.
The conservatives and the right were an affront to democracy, and the hardcore left, way left, didn't value people's property. No, they're not the same. It's like you kill one person, you're a murderer. If you kill 100 people, you're a murderer. I mean, all of it was horrific to watch. But I just don't think there's an innocent party here.
Okay, we'll move on to Governor Cuomo and his investigation and the politics of the state. So, George, I see a book that you've written with a picture of the governor on it. So I'll give you first crack in terms of the investigation, which now has expanded. There is now an investigation, or they are investigating whether family members and friends were given preferences to testing for the virus. We know about the information that was withheld for the nursing homes, and then there are the allegations of sexual harassment that he's also facing, that Tish James is investigating, as well as Chuck Levine, a local assemblyman on the assembly side. We'll let you, George, kick it off on your take on this.
Well, first of all,
and don't hold back, George.
My new book that came out in the fall is called Mario Cuomo, The Myth of the Man. I first met him when I was a freshman in college in 1970 when I was a local lawyer. And Mario and I spent a considerable amount of time together, particularly when he was out of office. But I thought it was important to tell the story of Mario Cuomo, particularly from my perspective as a conservative, my perspective as a Roman Catholic. And in many ways, Mario Cuomo is a walking contradiction. He wanted to be St. Thomas More and Machiavelli at one and the same time. I would argue that Andrew just wants to be Machiavelli. So he doesn't try to rationalize anything the way his father did, particularly on various social issues. Having said that, when Mario was in office, and I think the assemblyman will agree that Mario's thug was Andrew Cuomo, and I happen to believe he enjoyed that role. And since Joe Picoco went to jail, Andrew is his own thug, which is getting him into trouble because he's surrounded by a kiddie corps where there are no real adults to say, no, you can't do that. No, that is stupid. Why don't you shut your mouth on that one? So it's a very weak gubernatorial structure, and he's not as brilliant as his father, far from it. And so it opens the door to getting into trouble. So in terms of the nursing home, I should point out that on March 12th, the first week of the lockdown, my mother died in a nursing home in Bayside, Queens, Catholic nursing home, Osname Hall. Until last week, I did not see my father for 14 months. The last time I saw him in March 12th, when I told him his wife of 70 years died. I got to see him for the first time last week. He turned 94 years old, retired New York City cop. Remarkably fit, I'm happy to say. He's been in a room basically for 14 months and he hasn't lost his mind. Has been incredible. They came downstairs. We still can't go upstairs to see him. But so I have a bias about nursing homes, and I'm happy to say this nursing home weathered the storm extraordinarily well. My concern is I'm not shocked about Andrew Cuomo playing with the numbers, okay, because he was looking to become the great hero of the nation. And then he writes the book. Now, let me put it in perspective. Having written and edited 14 books, the Cuomo book that you see above my head, that took 3 years, year and a half of research, year and a half of writing. I still have a full-time job. I've been an investment banker for 45 years. I'm chairman of a bank. On a good day, and you can talk to David McCulloch as I have and other historians, if you could do 1,500 words a day, it's a good day. So suddenly he's running the state, having press conferences every day, quote unquote, writing a book. I know how hard it is. And to turn around about an 80,000, I think it's 100,000 words, I figured out that book in 3 or 4 months, obviously others were doing a lot of work for him, were they government employees? Secondly, a $3 to $5 million advance, I'm sure on this deal he got. Let me put it in perspective. Best he got was a 15% royalty on 50,000 copies. That's $250,000 in royalties. He gets $5 million. I mean, I'm reminded of.
So what are you saying about so where is that money coming from? Is that something, what's wrong with somebody overpaying for a book?
That's insane in this day and age. He's not David McCulloch. He's not Robert Caro. He's not Stephen King. His previous book sold 3,500 copies, which he got an $800,000 advance in, and HarperCollins got their clock cleaned on this book. To overpay like this, they know better. They know the numbers. They are pros. It's absurd for him to get a $5 million advance, or a deal, I should say. So I just question, it's like, remember Tammany Hall's George Washington Plunkett honest graph? I saw my opportunities and took it. That's what comes to mind here. So I'm appalled by this. I'm appalled there was an outrage. Back in January 1995, Newt Gingrich, who actually has written real books, got an advance of $250,000 for a book when he became speaker, and the end of the world came. Everyone was beating him up that he turned it down and took a $1 advance.
But George, tell me again, what is are you alleging corruption? Are you saying that somebody is paying him and that there's a quid pro quo with the payment, or is it just?
I don't have proof of making any allegations. All I can say is you can talk to any publisher who will give a man a $5 million advance.
Because you've written all these books and you don't get that money.
No. I get royalties. I get what I earn.
What's the concern from the public? Why should I, as a voter in New York or a taxpayer in New York, object to Andrew Cuomo getting vastly overpaid for a book that he may or may not have written?
All right. I would suggest it's an outrage, $5 million. Publishing houses know better, particularly when your previous book only sold 3,500 copies. It's an outrage in my judgment. There should be outrage. Secondly, the other arguments being made is like, He was tooting his horn as the great hero, writing a book while he was covering up numbers. Was he covering up numbers to promote the book? That's something voters will have to decide for themselves as well. So these are particular issues here. And if there was a cover-up, he will pay the price for it. In terms of the harassment charges, I'll wait till the reports come in. I don't know what to make of it. I just don't know. And, I had the pleasure of meeting a number of times the first girlfriend. She was a very pleasant, charming lady. I don't know what happened there, but I'll let the investigators figure out that one.
Okay.
In the meantime, he is wounded. Now, he was known to threaten, be mean, be nasty to people at all times. He's wounded. I don't think he could govern effectively. And, he will fight this. What I will say is he will fight it to the end, because he has the spirit of his father looking down on him, saying, what is dad thinking? He's an Italian guy. I grew up in Brooklyn, Queens, spent 35 years in Queens. That's when I first met the Cuomos. Andrew's an Italian kid from Queens. He has his father's shadow over him, which has haunted him his entire life, and what is dad thinking? And he has an 80-year-old mother who is going to say, son, what's going on here? He will fight it to the end. That's the nature of the guy. Whether or not he survives, I don't know, but expect him to fight it to the end and try to serve out his term.
Okay.
May I say, none of what you're saying has anything to do with the fact that he's the most effective governor we've seen since Franklin Delano Roosevelt. That he's been amazing in terms of economic development, in his social
Really? Have you
justice
looked at
agenda.
some of the scandals in Buffalo, the billion-dollar boondoggle up there?
You use the terms, but it's not true. They actually did redevelop Buffalo. They actually are. He does these $10 million grants to revitalize downtowns, which I can't understand why our community doesn't try to get these things. He's got an actual agenda and a plan, and he's following through in terms of a clean energy transition. I can go down a humongous list of the things that he's actually accomplished. The things that you're describing, you may not like the guy, you may not like his personality, you may say he's got character flaws, but he's been a fantastic governor, in my opinion.
So you're suggesting that these character flaws, that the harassment charges are true. And remember, this is the governor who forced out the attorney general a couple of years ago. So he gets a pass because you like his policies. Is that what you're suggesting?
The harassment charges that you're talking about, and firstly, we don't actually know what the issues was. They're being investigated. My feeling is, though, unless there was actual criminal assault, extortion, basically telling a woman that unless she gives sexual favors, she's going to lose her job or whatever. A comment, well, how was your weekend, does not qualify as sexual harassment. And if those things were offended people, you censure the guy. You don't impeach him. Just like Clinton should have been censured, not impeached. Al Franken should have been censured, and I don't even think what he did qualified, should not have been thrown out of office. It can't be that easy to derail a person's political career because you say 20 years ago, he told me something that I found offensive.
I don't necessarily disagree with you, but there are, again, if someone on the right, a Republican, is accused of harassment, or a CEO is accused of harassment, he's thrown out in 5 minutes. They want him to resign.
Criminal complaints against and one actual rape charge, and they didn't impeach him and they didn't prosecute him. You mean like that? If a Republican does it, you're saying?
No, if Republican's accused, he's certainly drummed out of office almost immediately.
Like Matt Gaetz?
It's just sort of like CEOs today. If there's an accusation, you're drummed out of office. My argument is you can't have your cake and eat it. If one side is guilty, the other side's guilty. Although I don't disagree with your reasoning concerning the issues confronting the governor on that case. You may be absolutely right, and I disagree. Hello, how are you? How was your weekend? To me, is not harassment. What I'm saying is there needs to be consistency.
Jerry, what's your take on Governor Cuomo?
Look, I can't get into the bookitis thing. George has written umpteen books. I wrote my own books. Both of our books probably didn't sell as well. We surely didn't get the kind of advance that Andrew has, but we have to move on in life. I look at this sort of balancing the scale. I think one of the reasons why Andrew finds 52% of the people in New York State are telling him not to resign is because let's just think about it. Since Robert Moses, nobody has gotten as many public works projects through in this state with all the NIMBYs, if you will. The LaGuardia Airport expansion, the Belmont Racetrack facility that's going to open, it's going to be the home of the Islanders, the Long Island Railroad Terminal and the Moynihan Building. So, when I look at these things, notwithstanding everything that's coming, by way of negative critique, I also say to myself, he's got to have the benefit of the doubt. He's innocent until proven otherwise. But when you start to think about a lot of the things that he's been able to do, those of us who face the NIMBYs in various positions that we've held over the years, this guy has performed miracles. And maybe if he has a bully instinct, whatever it is, he's gotten things to happen, including the third track on the Long Island Railroad, which is a significant project. I worked on the first phase of third track, if you will. And all I knew is that everybody along the line from Elmont to Garden City and on just said plain no. So, a lot of things have happened under his stewardship. Now, does this negate anything else that's been alleged against him? I think in the end, the public will judge it, but the legislature will. The Attorney General will render a report based on her conclusions and her findings. And the governor will more than likely stay on for another year and a half. And then he'll have to weigh the merits of whether he runs again. But, we know Andrew, and Andrew is not quitting. So, but again, when you want to talk about things that people get done, the kind of things that he's gotten done are the kind of things that Robert Moses was able to do, and nobody since.
Adam?
Jerry makes very good points. It takes a tough guy or gal to jam through all the projects he got through. The Tappan Zee Bridge, you could see the water as you were driving over it for many years, and no one said anything. And usually government's reactive, not proactive. They wait for a couple people to die in a huge collapse or something before they move forward. But the bridge, the airport, the third track, all issues that were impossible and got done. So you got to give him credit there. But on the flip side, New York's losing population. He allowed a budget to go through that exploded taxes. I can't tell you how many people that I know personally are going to live in Florida for 6 months and a day. And in the end, the tax base is going to erode and to keep up the public works that he wants to put through, or any other elected official, and the things that the middle class and the working poor want and need, they're going to end up paying for it. Our business model, especially for someone who runs businesses, doesn't work in the long term. I mean, I can make if I make $1 million a year, I make another 120 grand a year just living in Florida for 6 months and a day. It pays for my house. So the huge spike in the budget this year is hurtful while helpful in the very short term to some of the infrastructure that needs to be built and the people who are hurting after COVID. It's going to hurt us attracting capital long term. As far as the book deal, my brother is a MacArthur Grant winner and an author, and writing a book is all encompassing. It's not somebody just banging out a pulp fiction. I mean, that kind of book is a labor of 60 hours a week for years at a time. So how he possibly did that at the same time he was protecting the community and fighting for us while COVID was happening is beyond me. I mean, there's no way he didn't use resources outside of his own to get that done. But the thing that bothers me, and the positive, look, he got things done. You might think he's a bully, but this is a tough town. But lying about the number of deaths in the nursing homes, I mean, the first and foremost, trust in that in government is helping you and protecting you and doing things to nurture and improve your community. And lying about how things were, regardless of your issues or reasons, is unacceptable. And just reason enough for me not to be supportive of him if he ran again.
Can somebody clarify for me, because I'm hearing this now from several of you about these lying about nursing home deaths. correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that these were individuals who were residents of a nursing home who went to a hospital and died of COVID in a hospital and were counted as having died in a hospital. If they didn't pretend that this many people didn't die, they were counted as having died of COVID, but they were counted as dying of COVID in a hospital and not dying in the nursing home because they didn't die in a nursing home. Please correct me if I'm wrong, because I would really appreciate knowing.
The numbers, the overall numbers were correct. What the problem was to determine the source of where COVID was. So you are grossly understating the number of people who got very sick. The fact that they walked out or they were taken out of the nursing home doesn't mean that it wasn't concentrated, that the spread of the disease was not concentrated there. And they were asked about it, and the state was asked about it, and they did not disclose that information to the press or to the legislature or to the federal government for 4 or 5 months.
Yeah, but you know why? Because
that is the reason that, and this is Democratic legislators.
I know everybody was very, very upset. I mean, in sense, but may I also ask for clarification?
And he had a policy, and they thought it was because he had said, and he cited CDC, that patients from the hospital could be sent back into the nursing homes, even though they could still have the disease, and that was spread that way.
In fairness,
that was the second order. So part of it was a concern that that decision was subject to criticism because he allowed that. He was covering up a mistake he made, and rather than owning up to it, he changed the numbers so he wouldn't.
And may I say that's how it's characterized, as an intentional deception. But my remembrance of it was in the very beginning.
Well, Letitia James did say so in her report. Or the factual thing is, if you read Letitia James's report, she said that, and she also explained why it was a problem for him to do it. I have an interesting Andrew Cuomo. I was in Queens, where Andrew Cuomo was. I had papers there, and we had him in when he was running for state attorney general. Eliot Spitzer was running for governor. Ask me about the interview we had with Eliot Spitzer sometime. But a lot of people in Queens had real problems. Democrats had real problems with Andrew Cuomo, and I asked him about that in an interview. And I said, Andrew, they just said you're so abrasive and you can't be worked with. And he gave sort of an answer that I ran my father's campaign for governor, and that's when I said, yes, but a lot of people really are just saying that, people that are Democrats in here. And he said, I got into government to make a difference, and I'm very passionate, and I'm not a go along, get along kind of guy. So
I should add that the Queens problem, and I lived in Queens for 35 years and was very active back in the late 60s, 70s in Queens politics from a conservative party perspective. It goes back to the mayor's race in 77. I get into it in great detail in my book because that's an important turning point in Mario's political life when he lost that primary to Ed Koch. But Andrew, again, kid from Queens, St. Sebastian's Parish in Woodside, Queens on Roosevelt Avenue. Andrew in 1977 threatened to punch me out. That's the first time we met at a Catholic gathering there of 1,000 people. Andrew with his punk friends was like a real wise guy. And it goes back to the Ed Koch thing of the flyer that went around that was distributed, particularly at Roman Catholic churches. I've seen it. I know about it. It said, vote for Cuomo, not the homo. And that was pinned to Andrew. Whether or not he was guilty of it, I cannot prove, nor could anybody else. However, some of his friends were caught handing out these flyers. So it goes back to that issue where he left a very bad taste in a lot of mouths back in 1977. Ed Koch never forgave the Cuomos for that. even though Mario was trying to broach a peace when Andrew was first running for governor the first time in the disastrous campaign. So there is bad blood with the Cuomos, particularly Andrew and Queens, going back to the 70s, and people have long memories.
Steve, I just want to add something about this nursing home hospital thing. I think there's a story yet to be told, and it's not going to be a nice story, about why people in nursing homes, in many instances, who had COVID were not accepted in hospitals when they were in serious condition. And it may be now, and it may be 6 months from now, but I think there'll be a story told about the influence of certain groups, if you will, who wanted to keep those people in the nursing homes, as opposed to letting them get into the hospitals for treatment that they needed. So I've always been concerned about it, but I just think that eventually the sunlight is going to shine on it.
Jerry, just know that I have friends at Northwell. There was no room for an additional body at the very early days of this, and they had to be sent back because there's no place to keep them. It wasn't a fact that Cuomo sent them back to the nursing homes. It's that he lied about the process that bothers me. I mean,
I don't think Cuomo per se had anything to do with the policy. I think he allowed certain things to happen, and whether knowingly or otherwise. And some of the organizations, that are bigger than the nursing home movement took advantage of it.
So let me ask you this: we're debating Cuomo. Who's going to be the Republican challenger, and is Cuomo going to be the Democratic nominee? Jerry?
Well, I'll make my prediction. Okay, let me say this: Lee Zeldin may have accumulated $2.7 million in an effort to run for governor, but I doubt that he can get 3% of the vote in the 5 boroughs. Okay, he's just not going to resonate being 100% Trumper running in New York City. And while he might do well in parts of upstate New York, which will get him up to 30 or 32% statewide, he's not the candidate who can. He's not another George Pataki. If you want my prediction as to who the next Democratic candidate will be for governor, I think it's a person by the name of Kirsten Gillibrand, who I think is ready to move out of the shadow of Chuck Schumer. And would like to come back to New York and run for, in my opinion, and run for governor. And it's a toss-up between her and Letitia James. But my suspicion is that the Democratic nominee will be Kirsten Gillibrand.
I'm hoping it's going to be Kathy Hochul. She's been an amazing lieutenant governor.
But she'll win Buffalo.
Well, she's also been all over the state. You've never had a more active, engaged lieutenant governor.
No. The most active engaged was named Mario Cuomo.
Okay.
But listen,
back in those days, Huey Carey didn't care that he was wandering around the state. He built up a background through being Secretary of State, having offices all over the state, and traveled the state constantly when he was lieutenant governor. Because unlike Pataki land and Andrew Cuomo land, where they put a great lock on everybody, no one could speak without the blessing of the governor, it was very different back in those days. So you got to give Mario credit. He worked it. And that's why he beat Ed Koch so easily in that primary.
Kathy Hochul is a wonderful lady, and she's worked very hard. But the Democrats are going to need a candidate who can raise substantial amounts of money throughout the state. And you need somebody like a Gillibrand to do it.
Adam?
Yeah, I know Kathy. I met her a couple of times when I was running for office. She is bright. She's very presentable and personable, and would be a fine governor. And I would vote for her. I like the 2 guys from Long Island who are probably going to run also, both Swazi and Bellone. I think they're both very capable. I think Swazi's toned down his me first, I should say, personality, and I've become friendly with him, even though 8 years ago he wanted to kill me when I ran against him. And I do think we have a host of great candidates, even beyond that. In the state Senate, there's some good candidates also. So I think we have a bright future with who will be our next governor. I just sincerely hope that the narcissism of our current governor, doesn't throw his hat in and muck it up. So some distant third-party candidate or candidate through a runoff can squeak in somehow. But I do think
anyway that it's Andrew Cuomo. Does he survive?
I would go out on a limb and say the following: if Andrew Cuomo is not completely disabled as governor, he will seek a fourth term if he can get away with it. Why? Because he wants to do something his father could not achieve. You gotta always remember, to understand the son, you have to understand the shadow of the father. And if he could do it, and he's sitting on, I think, $28 million at the moment, I think he would do it, and he would now. He may have a problem with primary. You know, his two primaries in the past, his opposition got Zephyr Teachout and Cynthia Nixon, each got 35% of the vote. And can they get another fifth? Can a strong candidate get that extra 16% that's needed to get 51% of vote in primary? I'm not sure, because the unions have stuck with Mario, with Andrew, the African Americans sticking with Andrew. So it'll be interesting to see. Secondly, for a Republican to even come close to pulling this off, it has to be a perfect storm. George Pataki won with a plurality of votes. He won with only getting 26% of the vote of the city of New York. In past elections, back in the days of Nelson Rockefeller and Jacob Javits, you had to get around 35% of the city vote, which they generally did. It dropped considerably. Ned Reagan, state controller, back in yesteryears, Republican, also won his last term against, she was president of the city council years ago, the woman he beat, but he won with only 23% of the vote of New York City. However, since Pataki's time, upstate New York populations have declined considerably. All line, blue collar, working class, what I call Reagan Democrats, most of them are dead or moved to Florida. Rural Republicans have moved out as well. So you don't have the demographics that you had when upstate was a very strong upstate place. And Westchester County, which once was a Republican bastion, Rob Astorino, who, I think he's a very fine candidate. I think he's very good on his feet, a very bright guy. We agree on many things. However, he lost to Cuomo. Then he was denied re-election as a county executive, although I thought he was a very competent county executive. They were out for state senate last year and couldn't carry a seat in Westchester County. And so now he's running for governor. Just makes no sense. So be it a Zeldin, a Astorino, Molinaro, who ran last time, the county executive from upstate, is thinking again, it has to be a perfect storm. And that would mean Andrew being very weak, the Working Family Party, which despises him, runs their own candidate, does extremely well. It has to be what Pataki had, and that doesn't happen too often, and I doubt it will happen next year.
So let's move to another topic that some of our columnists have written about. George, you have, and Adam, and that is the Nassau County budget. We're in year 21 of state oversight. The county had to go begging in the year 2000, one of the most affluent counties. It still requires help. This year, NYFA bailed them out by refinancing the county with some bonds, and there was also the money that came from the federal government. How do you see the county's finance, and what's the matter with Nassau that it can't go on its own to handle its own finances, that it needs the help of this oversight agency?
Me?
You want to go first?
I'll let Adam. We had Adam on as a discussion on this, so we will continue that because we had a discussion about finances and what Nassau County wasn't doing with the panel. But we'll let Adam start it off.
Well, George and I both served on NYFA. And while everybody says we don't want oversight, NYFA borrows money at a cheaper interest rate than the county can because they're higher rated. And it's almost like a host and parasite kind of thing. They need them to keep their expenses down. And in a $3.2 billion budget or so, the $3 million budget of NYFA is a rounding error. But financially, there's been no great movement towards technology, bringing down the cost of government in the county. They had a police contract that was rejected that had a nice chunky hike that, if you do it with the tax cap, the numbers just don't work out over time. They had a huge deficit that was, saved by the federal government, and now they want to give money away in an election year to return it to the taxpayers. I think it was like a $375 payment that was proposed to $330,000 houses. The county needs to create, they have a whole thing with.
Adam, what is the matter with Nassau County? I have a modest proposal, which take away NIFA, and if it goes bankrupt, it goes bankrupt. There is actually, why is Nassau County the one county in New York State, one of the most affluent, that year after year needs state assistance? You were in the legislature, weren't you, at the time?
Let me say this. Nassau County's problems go back a long time, and when NIFA was created, it was created because of the fact that for years, Queso, Purcell, Galata, okay? Same situation. Nobody wanted to raise taxes because they felt it wasn't politically popular, if you will. Tax certiorari claims, in the millions and millions of dollars. But Nassau County was mismanaged literally for 25 to 30 years. And NIFA was the product of years and years of, the polling people would tell the Republican administration that people are against raising taxes and they wouldn't do it. I once told the late Tom Galata, rest his soul, a very good, decent guy, I said, Tom, if you raise taxes 2% every year for 5 years, you will wipe out your deficit. But the pollsters were telling the candidates, you can't do it. And so the county organizations chose not to do anything, if you will, to address the budget deficiencies. I met with Standard & Poor's and Moody's on a number of occasions on a voluntary basis to try to assist the county in those years. And the answer was Nassau County is not capable of helping itself. And so we are paying this price for years and years and years of just people playing political games.
Let me just say one thing, if you don't mind, Steve.
Yeah.
There was a Grant Thornton report in 2011, which not a single recommendation was taken to help.
Which I proposed to NIFA, I'll have you know.
Yes, and I read every page, which I was probably the only person that did. But in government,
George probably did as well.
In government, the way it works is if you have a suggestion that helps, then the elected official takes credit. If it doesn't work, you lose your job. So you're institutionalized into putting your head down and waking up 30 years later and having a pension. So there's no, look at what Curran's doing right now with redoing the assessment. It's necessary. And now every Republican's, harassing her about now you need an elected assessor and it's a problem. Anything you do that's out of the ordinary to do anything to help will be roundly criticized and affect your reelection. And at the end of the day, all of the legislature, the county executive, the controller, they're worried about keeping their jobs and reelection, and the polls tell them what to say as opposed to doing what their gut tells them. And that's why we have this financial issue.
Why doesn't
I may,
go ahead.
let me remind, we go down memory lane just for a moment here to build on what the Assemblyman was saying. I've been an investment banker for 45 years. My first 17 years was in municipal finance. I wrote my first book was on called The Guidebook to Municipal Bonds. If you suffer from sleeping problems at night, that's the book to read. But in 1999, when the gig was finally up, let's put it a little harsher, the cronyism, the incompetence of the Republican machine. Remember, Joe Margiotta went to jail for shaking down employees to give 10% kickbacks of their salaries. It was all about contracts and cronyism and patronage jobs. It was their personal piggy bank, and they ran it into the ground. They talked the great principles of conservatism. It was a great farce. So in 99, both the unanimous vote of the county legislature, Republicans, Democrats, sent a home rule bill concerning the creation of NIFA, based off the Municipal Assistance Corporation that was founded back in 74, 75-ish to save the city. Then Assemblyman DiNapoli introduced it in the Assembly, Senator Dean Scullis in the Senate. It was put into law. Okay, and so they asked for it. Now the Pataki administration, because there were Republicans running the county, also, if you remember, Assemblyman threw them $100 million in charity money. Okay, and that Also, when Swazi came in, what did he do? Raise taxes by 19%. You still had to raise taxes dramatically. And it was sort of getting onto an even keel again. But again, it's just this cronyism, this management just didn't go away. And when Ed Magano got in, and I supported him, I'm sorry to say, when I was appointed to NIFA by Governor Patterson, and I had an opportunity then to review all the numbers again, I realized that Ed Magano had no clue. He did not understand that borrowing under generally accepted accounting principles is not revenue. He couldn't get anything. He thought he had balanced budgets. He was incompetent and obviously was corrupt as well. So this madness has been going on for a long time. And now we have an opportunity to finally get this budget. It was technically under GAAP balance the last 2 years, but it was primarily due to the influx of federal money. I am hoping the county executive takes I think she's getting 300 million out of him. Is that the number?
A little bit more, yeah.
Yeah. I hope she uses that judiciously to clean up the books. What you can do is pay off the tax back money that's owed and sort of wipe that out. And that may start getting the county back on an even footing if they could find a way to fix the assessment system. So I'm hoping, unlike Albany, which has taken all the federal money and blown it in one shot, which means next year you got an automatic hole in your budget of $14 billion. I hope she doesn't do that this coming year. And regardless of the fact it's an election year.
Can someone explain to me why the state legislature goes along with this? There is another remedy. Orange County once went bankrupt. You could be thrown out there. If they're not going to correct themselves, I mean, this is like having a child who keeps on getting into financial trouble and his parents keep supporting him. Why don't they?
Well, under the NIFA statute, because of the structuring of the bonds and getting AAA rating, the county cannot go bankrupt. That's the indenture of NIFA and the indenture of the bonds. Secondly, Orange County, like New York City, had a technical default. Okay, it wasn't necessarily bankruptcy. What they did is then renegotiated debt.
Why should the state? I mean, this is one of the wealthiest counties in New York. Why does the state keep bailing these guys out?
Well, there's, and I can appreciate it having heard it all my life. It's called home rule, okay? No, irrespective of what goes on with New York City or any other municipality, the legislature won't touch these things. They're political hot potatoes. And I think what the problem here is, unfortunately, is that the thinking in Albany is, well, if we do it for Schenectady County or Orange County or Rockland County, we've got to do it for Nassau, we've got to do it for Suffolk. So there's just no desire on the part of Albany to establish a precedent of bailing anybody out, period. They will give a locality the right to impose a greater sales tax for whatever reason they need it. They will do anything that the locality asks for. But Albany has never, in my history there, and to date, if you will, has never acted proactively to try to either stop these things. I've seen legislation over the years introduced, some at the request of the controller, others at the request of others, if you will, to try to clean up these systems with borrowing and everything else. Didn't happen. When New York City got the bailout in the 70s, the bailout came from the federal government. But the state structured the Municipal Assistance Corporation. We created this new dynamic so that the city had money. But Albany will not touch local issues for fear that somebody else give it to one, the next one will want it.
Let me remind you, the bailout from the federal government was a loan, it wasn't cash. And the city had to agree to a number of caveats in terms of laying off people, not increasing certain taxes, doing this and that. And of course, the governor basically was the mayor of New York for 2 years and imposed his will on the city of New York. And the Municipal Assistance Corporation and the Emergency Financial Review Board, which had much stronger powers than NIFA has. Okay, they could impose, if there is a 1% deficit in the city budget, which is an accounting error nowadays, the Emergency Control Board could impose a control period and basically take over the city. So they were draconian measures on the city of New York, which sadly they were needed. But on the other side of the coin, Ed Koch, when he became mayor in January 1, 1978, the deficits that were projected over the next 4 years were huge. And he managed under GAAP accounting to balance the budget in 3 years. Some of his measures were tough and he was not loved by everybody. But under the law, when MAC was created in the control board, New York is the only municipality in the state, as far as I know, maybe Yonkers from their control board. They must budget balance their budgets under GAAP. NYFA must use that rule in addressing the problems of the county, but the county can do cash, still does cash accounting, and could fudge a so-called balanced budget.
Can I ask you a question? How much should we care who gets elected mayor of New York? If I live in Nassau County, how important is how the city is doing for us?
Well, I have to say this. What happens in New York City is really critical to Long Island and to the rest of the state. There's a whole 8 people now running for mayor of the city of New York. And I'm trying hard, even with a magnifying glass, to find a vision, if you will, on the part of the 8 as to how to run the city. The city's been mismanaged now for a number of years under the current administration. And unfortunately, it may take years to unwind the city's problems. But the fact of the matter is, if a mayor in the city of New York does a competent job, then all of us benefit. If a mayor of a big city like New York City doesn't do a good job, and we have a high crime rate, and it can't help but spill over into the suburbs, and candidly, the increased taxes have a tendency, just like a plague, to spread to other municipalities. So that what happens in New York can't be ignored by any of us, no matter where we live in the rest of the state. They do need to elect a mayor who's going to be able to handle this job and handle the challenge. But I can tell you, talking to many, many people in New York City over the last month or so, they don't have a clue as to which one of those people qualifies to be the next mayor.
Karen, do you have an answer for New York City, for New York City voters of who they should do? You're objective. You're living in Nassau County. You're not in the city.
No, but it's really important, as Jerry says. I mean, when you think about it, how many of Long Island homeowners are actually commuters to New York City? If people don't want to work in New York City, then our home values go down and everything like that. And it's very important for our quality of life that we use also the facilities of New York City. And I have been looking at the mayor's race. I did have a thought in mind, but I'm still undecided. I've been, following the debates and so forth. I haven't.
Karen Rubin, undecided. This is the first. I have been at many events. I've never seen you without an opinion on something.
That's because I don't offer an opinion on something that I haven't studied.
This has got to be a very difficult question if Karen can't form an opinion on this.
I'm still learning.
In 1993, I was the Conservative Party candidate for mayor of New York, running against Rudy Giuliani and Mayor Dinkins. I lost.
George froze.
Yeah, okay. Hopefully we'll get back.
Rudy and I have gotten along together for a host of long reasons. I'm most critical of him over the decades. But as we learned in 1975, if the city of New York should financially go down the rat hole, and the issue we have to be concerned about right now is commercial real estate. The first mayor, who really doesn't have a clue about finances, even he, in the budget he has proposed, has cut commercial real estate property taxes down by $2.5 billion. That's a huge number, and it may not even be close, because as law firms and other companies, as they already announced, particularly law firms, you got to clock hours in as a law partner. You could do that anyway, which they learned the past 15 months. Secondly, one law firm I know, White Shoe Law Firm, has about 9 floors in Manhattan, on the east side of Manhattan in the 50s. They expect to downsize over the next 3 years down to 1 floor. Now, if you're a partnership, that means a lot more money in your pocket because there's going to be a lot more rent, and they realize you can work from home. And then if you don't have more white collar people coming to the office who have expense accounts and whatnot, the high-end restaurants aren't going to do particularly well. You know, when the restaurant business was closed in New York City, the mayor made the stupid remark that he was concerned about reopening them because rich people go to restaurants. Really? Well, what about the 320,000 people who work, working class folks who work in those restaurants? But if the finances go down the rat hole and there is another crisis, I don't think it'll be like the 70s, but it could be a mess. That means people get very shy about buying New York bonds, which means interest rates will go up in Nassau as well as every other place, as we saw back in the 70s. A lot of municipalities couldn't even bring debt to market back in the mid-70s. That was a major issue. In addition to that, at the moment, Nassau County happens to be benefiting from the pandemic mess in New York because a lot of families in my old neighborhood of Greenpoint, Brooklyn, who are living in a little apartment with 1 or 2 kids, don't have a backyard, suddenly they're racing out by us here, where I'm in New Hyde Park. Real estate has gone through the roof here. This was a cop and fireman neighborhood back in the 50s and 60s. We got houses trading at $1 million, $2 million, $3 million. I wouldn't pay that money for them. So we're benefiting right now by an exodus of a subset of people who want better schools and want a backyard.
Let me go to Adam. Adam, you have any predictions for or any people that you think would do a job, which everyone is saying New York is facing, New York City faces a real challenge, and that impacts here. Does it also, who would be your pick? And is there a corollary here? If people aren't working in those law firms in the city, because a lot of them are living out here, is that going to help? Is that going to help Nassau County? Because folks that were commuting are no longer commuting, but working from home, and now they're eating out at restaurants in Nassau County?
So home values from Mineola to Montauk are insane right now because people are fleeing the city. You know, we talked about restaurants in Manhattan. I used to own 2. I know how hard it is to make money. I know the cost to run them. They're starving, literally and figuratively, financially. I'm also a principal of a commercial real estate firm. And with all the vacancies, a lot of these buildings' values are down conservatively 25%, which would wipe out a lot of the equity in a lot of the properties these folks have because of compressed cap rates and high valuations. If interest rates spike even a little bit and vacancies stay down, it's not going to be pretty for the commercial real estate revenue and for business in Manhattan and the 5 boroughs. Who would I want for mayor? I've had a couple conversations with Eric Adams and shared some creative ideas like monetizing air rights and doing energy performance contracts and a whole host of things. He was very, very surprisingly open to a financial rebirth of Manhattan. The next mayor needs to clean up New York. And I'm not saying police-wise, I mean, it's literally filthy. So it's more approachable. They have to be compassionate to those who are hurting, and they have to be pro-business. It's a fine line. I do think it's not a popularity contest, which is popular, which has become like who's the prom queen. Andrew Yang is the most popular name until he shot himself in the foot. I think Eric Adams would be a huge step up from de Blasio. A centrist Democrat would do a good job. I would vote for him if given the choice at this point.
Did
My perspective, I hope they all lose.
I want to remind, I'm reminded, I was swayed by the New York Times endorsement of Garcia. She has the skills and the record, the experience, and stuff. I really like her. But you guys all know the inside ball game, money ball of politics, and I don't. I look at the person's resume and their skills and their policies, and that gets me about as far as the racetrack, like the Kentucky Derby odds.
But she's quite capable.
Are you saying money is more important than what the publisher of a major New York daily says about who you should vote for?
Yeah, it's this inside stuff of like you said, how much money you can raise in the campaign, who the back room Democrats or whatever are supporting you.
It's the real estate industry in New York.
You want someone who cares, who shows up on time, and who has some self-effacing behavior and really wants what's best for the city. I mean, you're voting for the person, not for like their resume, because we've had some great resumes and bad leaders. I just want a good, kind, quality person who cares about everybody.
What do you
Let me
think
say
about-
this. I know Catherine Garcia, okay? A very, very competent person, a very articulate person, very extremely bright, and a really nice person. I wouldn't count her out. It may seem like she's, on that the men are dominating this thing, but with this crazy ranked choice voting that I still haven't figured out what I'm going to do when I vote in the city, with this ranked choice voting, anything can happen. And if she stays in a number 2 slot, she could get into a runoff primary where she might go head to head with one of the male candidates. So I wouldn't totally count her out. She's got the Times, the Daily News endorsements. She's getting some credibility movement in her favor. So I wouldn't say that she's an also-ran.
There's another issue that's been a major issue in the city, and actually it's been nationally, and that is the rise in crime and violent crime in the past year. New York City had gone down to such levels. When I had newspapers in Queens, I think there was a year where there were 2,400 homicides. And I think of recent years, it was like 400. And now we've seen a spike, and there's concerns in neighborhoods about going there. One of the great things about New York as an area to go to was the low crime rate. Is how big a deal is that? And anyone to venture a guess as to why crime has gone up in New York and other places?
Although if I could suggest the following, having lived over half a century in the city of New York. I grew up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s in New York when crime went out of control. My father was a New York City cop during that period. And to this day, at 94, he could tell you stories that'll curl your hair. But just to give you an idea, I put some numbers here together. Murders in 1945, there were 292. By the time Lindsay left office in 73, they were 1,800 a year. We reached a peak of about 2,000 a year in 1992. That declined down to 289 in 2018. In 2019, it went to 311. In 2020, it's 462. So just to give you an idea, shootings between April 2020 and April 2021 are up 166%. Rape is up 53%. Assaults 39%. Robberies 28%. Car thefts 34%. And homicides are up 16% and 30% versus 2019.
So what's that a function of? What's that a function of?
I think it is the change in policing. Back during the Lindsay years in particular, cops were expected to react. They were not proactive. Now, I happen to be a great supporter of the broken windows. I had the privilege of calling James Q. Wilson, the great social scientist, who is one of the creators of that thought. And if you talk to Dr. Fred Siegel today, who I think is also one of the great social scientists, Wilson and Moynihan, I think, were tops. He will suggest what saved the city and turned the city around to this gentrification in the neighborhoods. When we moved out of Greenpoint, Brooklyn, out to Flushing, Queens in '66, it wasn't very nice. My father was a cop in the 9-0 Williamsburg for 32 years. And Williamsburg, which is now like Nirvana, was an absolute crazy house. Life was cheap, to put it mildly. So the drop in crime during the 90s permitted this gentrification. And those of us who grew up in a time where there were robberies next door, the apartment upstairs, wherever, it became a way of life. The younger generation who are not accustomed to that way of life that I grew up in, they are going into panics even by the slightest increase in crime, adding to the exodus from the city we're seeing out to Nassau County and Westchester. So I think there has been a difference in policing. In addition to that, while the numbers are far from back at the MTA, be it the subways, the railroads, or the Metro North along our railroad, in the city subway system, for instance, jumping the turnstiles is pandemic. Cops were told, don't even think about it. Pandemic is the word to use. So what we're seeing is all these little things add up, which Bloomberg, or we should say Bratton and Kelly, dealt with effectively. That's not happening now. And that quality of life begins to decline, and it takes on a life of itself. And that's what happened during the Lindsay years.
Aaron, what's your take? And now we have a different thing. Stop and frisk, which was popular during Bloomberg. Federal court said you can't do it. It discriminated against Black people. We have a Black Lives Matter movement. There's concerns about police treatment of Black people. Karen, what do you see as the answer where you want to make sure that, and there's a concern where police are seen for a sizable population in the city as not being friendly toward them?
You know, I have a trouble with the statistics. I have a trouble with the way the data is presented and whether it is data. And I must say I get very uncomfortable when I hear that the broken windows philosophy was a good one. I think that we need better policing, fairer policing. I respect the fact that that the governor has required all the municipalities to come up with more effective policing. I don't. You know, this is a sociological thing. You can look to, I mean, I don't think you can just characterize it in these broad terms. You throw out these numbers of homicides and robberies and this, that, and the other thing. You know, last year, especially with COVID, I think that there were problems. You look around the country, I think one thing you're missing is what we're experiencing, and you're saying New York City, how does it compare with the rest of the country? They're saying about people having, you know, mental problems, emotional problems because of COVID, economic problems because of COVID. I think it really needs to be more studied, and it's very easy to say, oh, this is the fault of bad mayoral leadership.
There was one thing there's one factor with the crime, and it has gone up nationally. And it's one thing that I wanted to check out. There were a lot of police and EMS who got sick during the past year because they were frontline workers. I'm curious as to what the staffing levels have been in police forces across the country. I know at one point early on, a quarter of the New York City police fire department was out ill and had COVID. Let me move to one other thing. Let's move into Nassau County. That's where we are. Although we agree that the city has a big impact on our lives and on the jobs and our real estate values. I have my pet objection out here is the disparity in education. We talk about education in this country as evening the playing field, that everyone has an opportunity, and yet we have a system of financing where the Sewanaka School District you'll spend $25,000 per year per student, which incidentally, compared to other places in the country, is not bad. But it'll go up against Great Neck that this year is $37,000. You have places like Roosevelt where they're threatening to sue because they're violating the Constitution's requirement for an adequate level of education. Am I the only one who's noticing the fact that it just seems very unfair that public school education, it's public, but it's not equal, and that your people in the more affluent areas, kids in the more affluent areas, are having a lot more money spent on them in getting an education?
Steve, let me give you a legislative answer. I testified in the Levittown case back in the 70s to try to, if you will, advance the theory that the poor school districts were constantly being hurt by the legislature. This year, about the only thing as Adam talked about the taxes that they put through, about the only thing that I can pat them on the back for is the fact that this is the first time in history, in recent history, that they have played with the formulas, if you will, to try to put more money into the poorer districts like the Wyandanch and Roosevelt and a variety of other districts. So it's the first genuine attempt to try to create some balance, if you will, in a system that has always worked against the poorer districts. And by the way, there's one other set of districts, and these are the districts with high tax, low wealth, who don't have shopping malls, who don't have the kind of ratables to support them. So to their credit, this is the first year that they actually took a stab at trying to bring up some of the poorer districts. You can't wipe out the disparity overnight between the rich districts and the poor districts, but at least you can make an effort to put in targeted aid into these poorer districts where they deal with some of the educational problems that they face. So about the only thing I can check off, if you will, on one side of the column that I really genuinely think they did well was for the first time they addressed this issue.
Adam, you were a school board member in Roslyn, where I live, and where my kids graduated, and where we spend 30-something thousand per student, and they get a great education. But you can travel from Great Neck school, to a school in the Sewanaka School District. It's a mile away, and they're spending 10 or 12,000 more in Great Neck or a place like Roslyn.
So this is probably going to be heresy when I say this, because I was very engaged in Roslyn schools. I got engaged. My wife made me after the theft that Tassone stole. It's not only about money, it's about parental engagement. If you were in a poor community and you're a single family home and your parents working 3 jobs and there's nobody there to look over your shoulder and help you with your homework and get you engaged and drive you to practice and get you from school, and you're a latchkey kid and you're on your own, no matter how much money you spend, it's never going to be equal. I mean, my daughter went to Carnegie Mellon, and in the city of Pittsburgh, no matter what school you go to, you were allowed to take 1 class a semester at any school. University of Pittsburgh, Duquesne, Carnegie Mellon, and it availed people of different quality schools to get an education that was well-rounded. And I would almost say if you allowed 1 day a week students from any district to travel and take an elective at another district, and they had the resources and the involvement and the engagement, they'd see a whole new world and possibility. But money isn't the answer. It's about leadership. A good superintendent, and school board that is engaged helps a lot. Parental involvement helps a lot. There is a fair amount of money in all these districts. But when you have parents who are CEOs and they can donate $300,000-$400,000 to put turf on a field versus parents who can't even put food on the table, it's very hard to have equal schools.
All right.
It's not correct to say that the figure that you said, $37,000 per student, that's not an accurate figure, because what you tend to do is take the whole lot.
Accurate. It was during the debate. We had Barbara Berkowitz and Michael Glickman, and it was 37.
Well, the problem that I have when you talk about equal education is that it tends to be the lowest common denominator, which I don't think benefits anybody. And the fact of the matter is, Jerry, they've already been allocating way more money to these districts that don't have, like you said, the benefit that Great Neck has of a commercial tax base. So, for example, Roosevelt, 50% of their budget comes from the state versus about 4% of Great Neck's budget coming from state aid. And the rest of it comes from property taxes.
But it's still, Monica gets more state aid, and it's still $12,000 behind. So we're going to have to we're going to have to leave it off on that, because we're running at it. We're running long, and as you all know, you all have word limits from me in what you can put in your columns, and also how much time we can spend in doing our town hall. We should do this again. I really enjoyed it. I will. I figure that 4 very opinionated people who aren't afraid of sharing their opinions with our readers would have something to say, and on a discussion. And you guys didn't let me down. So I'd like to thank our panelists, Adam Haber, Jerry Kremer, George Marlin, Karen Rubin, all of whom appear regularly in the 6th Blank Slate Media publication and on our website, theislandnow.com. If you're not already, I strongly recommend that you subscribe to the paper, support good local journalism, and have more to support what we're doing and the opinions that are expressed by our columnists and our readers. I'd also like to thank Northwell Health again for sponsoring the discussion. For those who were unable to watch tonight, a recording of the debate will be found on our website, The Island Now. It'll also be on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook. You'll be able to go to YouTube directly by clicking on the link to The Island Now. And a story about this evening's event will also appear in our newspaper. So once again, I want to thank all those in attendance and our panel for an excellent discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Good night.